Good morning, everyone. Lowry has a short announcement he'd like to make.
Hi guys, my name is Lowry Ahola. I'm graduating from the strategy program this semester. I'm originally from Finland. I started my mission in Sweden. Came here to live the American dream. And so far so good. I've been in the strategy program. I don't know if you've heard of Crocker Innovation Fellows. Anyone? Okay, so I was part of that, and then I was a Bennett Fellow last summer. So I started a company 6 months ago. It's called Broad Analytics. I don't know if any of you follow any of the business competitions here. Maybe some. Okay, so we did pretty well there. And we partnered up with the Museum of Art here. We've been beta testing our product. We do the indoor, we do indoor tracking with museums. And so we've been beta testing there. In the first 2 months, we collected over 10 million data points. We partnered up with a Thanksgiving Point, they were an assistant for us, and we're looking for interns this summer. And so I thought, what better place to go recruit than from the Smart Strategy teams. And so I'm sure plenty of you already have internships for this summer. We're just looking for someone for the spring term, someone who's very driven, self-motivated, aka strategy student, and then also someone who is able to speak with people, museum directors, and do a lot of work with people, almost like sales. And so, yeah, any questions?
Time frame, and does it have to be spring? Can it be other parts of the summer?
Preferably spring. It can be other parts of the summer as well. But we're looking for someone with 20 hours. And it's not paid. But the things that you learn is things that people pay a lot of money for. So that's a good question. Other questions?
You say it's going to be like sales. Is going to be lead generating, talking to museums?
Yeah.
What is the responsibility?
So what you'll be doing, and we're also expanding to the retail space. And so what you'll be doing is you'll be finding customers, basically what I'm doing right now. You'll be interviewing them and understanding what their needs are, and then we're creating the product around that. And so it's a very high impact position. Okay.
So it's not paid, but if you were to do well and be successful, how many employees do you have now? And is there a possibility for equity or anything like that?
So anytime there's a good guy or a good gal who works hard and gets the job done, I'm always for bringing people on. Absolutely.
How big's the team?
There are three people who are, 2 of us are full-time, one's half-time.
So it sounds like it's sort of like almost a product development position, right? You're interviewing customers and you're trying to help figure out what the product.
That's correct. And I mean, in a small startup, you do everything, and so you'll help us figure out how to go about, go to the market. You help us figure out. I mean, it's just everything. Very, very fun stuff. I love it. So I'll just grab my email.
So the stuff that you were reading this last week might be helpful to you in this particular position. Good. I had him read the first 3 chapters to the Innovator's Method. This is the new book with Nathan.
Okay. Yeah.
So
I've not read that yet, but it's not out, right?
Well, yeah, it's not out. It'll be out. Yeah, it'll be out this summer. But yeah, check with your Nathan. We'll be happy to share the first few chapters.
Awesome. Well,
thanks, Lowry. Appreciate it. We always like people when they come and bring opportunities. Okay, so just a couple of housekeeping items. You all should know about the graduation banquet tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock here, W408410. If you're going to bring a guest, it's $10 for your guest. You probably still sneak them in if you run up to $5.90 this morning and pay. But of course, your dinner is free as part of the strategy program. Matt Eyring, who is the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at Vivint, will be the speaker at our graduation. Matt started his career actually at Monitor as an MBA from Harvard Business School. Was the chief managing director partner at Innosight for a number of years before he came and took the job here as the chief strategy and innovation officer at Vivint. And I guess according to his bio now, Vivint is the largest home automation company in the world, so they're making some good progress. So we hope that you'll all be able to join us tomorrow. Are most people planning to come? Raise your hand if you're planning to come. Good. Yeah, no, I think you'll find then the second years will also be there. Questions?
Is it all the way dressed up business?
So this is a dressier event. You don't have to wear a tie, but slacks and a nice shirt or skirt, a nice shirt. Yes?
Is it okay to show up a few minutes late, half hour late? Is that something okay?
Yeah. Come when you can. We'd rather have you join us late than not come at all. So we'll probably still be eating at 6:30, 6:45. So not a big deal. Any other questions about that? Yes?
Not about that, can I use my mulligan?
You can use your mulligan today. Yes. You can use your mulligan today. And that means now I have to call in Samantha. So you can blame Austin. No, I'm just kidding. I wasn't going to pick on Austin today. All right.
Pass it around the room.
So, thank you for the feedback that you gave to Kyle last week. It's very helpful for me. I use that feedback in sort of the same way Toyota uses data to engage in Kaizen or continuous improvement. And I think, did I describe that to you at one point in time in this class about the Toyota production system and how they increase? So I'm getting some kind of like, I'm not sure people, this is pretty useful for, I think, personal life improvement. I think you want to use the sort of Toyota method of improving for, you actually want to fix your weaknesses. And when I'm trying to improve my class, I'm trying to fix the weaknesses in the class. When you're trying to differentiate in your career, you want to actually leverage your strengths. And just make sure that your weaknesses, you satisfy. You're good enough on the weaknesses that it doesn't become glaring. So Toyota production cells are typically set up in a U shape. They try to do this so it's easy for someone to be in the middle and be able to observe everything that's going on in the system. And they run the inventory, let's say through this way, it comes out this way. And let's assume they can do 1,000 units a day at a particular plant. But they want to do more than that. So how do they do more than 1,000 units? What's their process that they use to kick that up from 1,000 to something more than 1,000? Anybody know? Yes?
Evaluate the production chain and see if there's any flaws or inefficiencies that they can improve.
Okay, that's true. But specifically, how might they do it? So they got workers at each of these, stations that are running. These are all sort of stations where there's value added being done as the vehicle goes through these stations. The answer, yes?
I was just gonna say, take the one, whatever, I guess like Sam was saying, look at whatever the longest one is, whatever's taking the most time, try to cut that back.
Okay.
And over time.
If you're only doing 1,000 a day, it means one of these stations can only do 1,000 a day. There is a bottleneck somewhere, right? Because if all of these stations could do more than 1,000 a day, then your production would be more than 1,000 a day. So what you do is you analyze and you find the bottleneck. Let's say they find this station is the bottleneck. It can only do 1,000 a day. And they realize that they either have to redesign the machine or maybe they bring someone over to do some of the work from this. And they're able to kick this up to 1,200 per day. And then all of a sudden this jumps to 1,100. So what's your next step? Find the next bottleneck. And so now you go and you find maybe this one's the next bottleneck and that one was 1,100. And you get that one up to 1,300 and then all of a sudden this jumps to 1,150. And your next step is find the bottleneck. And when are you done?
When all of those lines fix the same amount.
Never?
You are never, that is the issue. With the Toyota production system, Kaizen means continuous improvement. You can always improve. There will always be a bottleneck. At some point it may come back to this station here, where now this becomes the bottleneck again, and you've got to figure out how to fix it. But it's interesting. So I had the chance to interview one of the senior executives at General Motors after, not too long after General Motors and Toyota had created the NUMMI joint venture in California. So this was a joint venture between Toyota and General Motors. Toyota was trying to figure out, this is in the 80s, mid-80s, can we make Toyota quality cars with lazy American workers? It was basically, you know, people were wondering whether American workers could make the high quality that Toyota got, because they pushed their workers pretty hard. So they were trying to see if they could produce in the United States. General Motors was trying to get the Toyota production system. So Toyota comes in, they set up, design the plant, and they have the top management, and then General Motors has the middle management of the plant. They launch their first production line. They're producing Toyota Corollas, and at the time, General Motors was making Novas, I think, in that plant, which some of you may have heard was a poor marketing decision in South America, where Nova means won't go, I guess. So it's not the best name for your car. So anyway, they launched this. 3 days in, the Toyota, Mr. Tanaka, who's the guy, who's the plant manager, calls the GM, all of the managers together in the plant. He's been watching what's been going on, and he hasn't been having people pull the andon cord, which is the cord they put to shut down the plant if there's a problem. Nobody's done that yet, and nobody's come and reported any problems. So he pulls people together and says, I want you to tell me what the problems are that you're seeing in the plant. And this GM executive report, he said, it was one of the smoothest launches we had ever seen. They were planning, they had very detailed planning. We were very impressed. Our response was, wow, we're just really impressed. Everything's going very smoothly, no real problems to report. And this is the way he said it. He said, Mr. Tanaka looked at us and he shook a finger at us and he said, no problem? No problem is a problem. Your job is to find problem. He was quoting Mr. Tanaka using the English that he used, and he basically went on to say, your job as the management is to find and expose the problem, because if you don't, how can we fix it? He says, I know there are problems. Your job is to find and expose them. A lot of times the American way is to, wait, problem? You know, we want to kind of hide those problems, right? We don't want to expose a problem. And this is a very different way of continuous improvement. So, so for me, when I'm trying to improve a class, if I can get some feedback on what are the biggest sort of problems, areas that we can improve on, then I can work on that next year. So next year, and by the way, I'm happy to provide after, if you and your team wanted to set up time to come in and get some feedback on your presentation, either for Sears or for Redbox. So that's something that next year now I can plan to try and have a sort of evaluation rubric that I can use to provide some direct feedback to each of the teams. So that's helpful feedback for me. So I use that as a way to improve the class each year, and I try and fix the bottlenecks, so to speak. And I think with our personal lives, that's what we're trying to do too, right? As we move towards trying to become more perfect individuals, we're trying to figure out what are our biggest bottlenecks, and we try and fix the bottlenecks. All right, so let's see. I had wanted to ask. So I've got Kylie. Kylie, what did you think was, from the reading from the Innovators Method, those first chapters, was there anything that sort of stuck out at you as sort of, I can see why this is important to strategy?
Well, I mean, in the chapter we read today, I love how it talked about the different management methods, depending on whether you're in a startup setting or corporate setting where, it's a little different, or the company wasn't established, you have to approach your management differently.
Okay.
And I guess that stood out to me because I'm involved in a startup right now. So reading through the different steps of how to manage in that setting, how to ask questions, pose, what was the next, the grand challenge, generate insights, you know, problem.
Okay, so the role of the leader is a little bit different, perhaps in a startup, or at least when you're trying to solve a high uncertainty problem, than it is when things are a little bit more straightforward. And the role of the leader has to be different. Others, what other thoughts, Russell?
Yeah, I was gonna say there's such a huge focus on experimenting and experimenting as fast as possible, as soon as possible. Whereas they said, you know, when they hire MBAs, I forget maybe Scott Cook, he's like, we have to retrain them completely because they just want to execute and just kind of go forward with what's being done, but they have to change the whole mindset and say, no, we're going to experiment as often and as soon as we can. And Amazon is kind of like, you know, every day's, you know, day one kind of approach.
Let me ask you, how many of you are getting a business degree as your major? Okay, so but most of you are getting, how many of you have had a class in product development? One.
Yeah, sure.
Sean's the only one. What's the class you've had in product development?
It was an internship we did with Kickstarter.
Okay.
So we used to build products and launch them with Kickstarter.
So this is an internship. So think about it. And this is part of what I'm wanting to introduce to you with Innovator's Method. With strategy, boy, it's a whole lot easier to do strategy if you have a great product. You know? It's like, wow, customers want to buy our product. This is pretty easy. You know? You know, strategy really it's pretty easy when you have something people want to buy, right? When you've nailed a problem that they want to have solved and you do it better than anybody else with your solution and you get it to them in a way that is convenient and easy, it's like, I'll buy that. And I'll tell you, strategy is really easy. It really is when you have great products. And earlier in this course we talked about is strategy. You know, we see these companies and these great strategies, and is it luck or is it foresight? Right? And my response was, it's lucky foresight, right? It's a little bit of both. But I'll tell you, if there's no foresight, you're done. With strategy, as a strategist, you have to be able to try and see what's next. You have to try and figure out what a customer wants and figure out how to meet that customer's need. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to make sure that you got introduced to that in the strategy class, this first one. Because it's something you typically don't get in the business school. Accounting will tell you we're the language of business. Yeah, well, if you don't have a good product, there's no language to speak, right? I mean, you don't sell much because you've got great accountants. You know, it's important to have good accountants, you know, to make sure that you pay your taxes and you don't go to jail and all that other good stuff. But product development, understanding, figuring out what the customer wants is an important part of strategy. And I wanted to make sure that you sort of got that in this class, and also that you get a kickstart on what do I need to do to be a more creative problem solver. This is the innovator's DNA. And then, if I'm actually going to go and work at a company and try and help them figure out what the product should be, like Lowry was just talking about, what do I do? How do I go about doing that in a way that will help me figure out whether this is a problem we're solving and whether this is a solution that's going to work? And that's why the Innovator's Method is really all about trying to offer the tools and the tests that you can use to know whether this is a problem we're solving, whether you've nailed a solution that people are willing to pay for, and then you have to figure out the business model, which is, the business model is, okay, I have a solution, but now it's, how do I get it to customers? So it's you know, you think Chotacool, this little, you know, cool refrigerator, yeah, but how do I actually then, what's the best way to get it to women in rural areas that can't afford refrigerators? And there are no local appliance stores. Now I have to have a distribution channel. That's a business model problem, which is, how do I get it to customers? How do I message? How do I make sure customers know that it's there and that they might want it? So that's separate from the solution. How do I build the cost structure side to make sure I've got the resources and the capabilities to deliver it at a price or at a cost where I can make money? So all of those things are important, and so that's why I wanted to make sure that you were introduced to that with at least some of my latest thinking and Nathan Furr's from the innovators method. All right, so if we think about building a team or an organization that can innovate, that can actually do product development, that can come up with new things that customers want, I've suggested to you in this class, you care about what we call the 3 Ps: people, processes, and philosophies. And these are actually described in chapters 7 through 10 of the Innovators DNA. Although I'm actually here on the process side now sort of substituting. What we talk about in the Innovators DNA is you want to have processes to be better questioners and observers and networkers and experimenters. These are particularly good for generating insights. Sort of a, oh, this might be an opportunity, right? It's a, oh, I do this observation. My sister is really, really worried about what she's going to wear to this wedding event. There's like some real angst here, you know, and you might think, you know, that's not really, you know, she's just like, it's not that big of a deal. You'll find a good dress, but it matters to her. This observation is what leads to an insight. Oh, maybe we could rent dresses over the internet, right? We don't know if it's going to work, but then there's a set of processes that you go through in order to pinpoint the problems, to prototype the solutions, and then you validate the business models before you scale the opportunity. Because you really do want to sort of nail the business model, which includes the solution, before you try and scale it. That way, you don't take risks. I was doing a workshop with a group of executives at a lot of senior organizations like General Electric and Sony and others. And one of the big challenges is they want risk taking, right? But the problem is we don't want failure, right? So we want you to take some risks, but we just don't want you to fail. And what they're starting to realize is that, what does failure mean? Well, failure means that you placed a big bet and you invested a bunch of money and it didn't work. That make sense? Right? That's really the failure. If you do a lot of experiments along the way and spend a little bit to try and figure out, and you learn something won't work, that's not a failure. All you did was you did a lot of experiments and you learned what wouldn't work in the marketplace. But really the failures are really when you go and you make a big investment and you're wrong. And that's what happens when there's a lot of uncertainty, because a lot of times you might think that the market wants this or this might work, but it's only your best guess. And that's really the message of the Innovators Method, is that your hypothesis as to what to do is just, remember, it's a hypothesis that needs to be tested with experiments and data, and then it reveals whether it will work or not once you've done the experiments. Okay, and that's why it's really important to do the experiments, because then you resolve the uncertainty around the problem. Then it's like, oh, okay, they didn't want this, but they wanted this, or you modify it in a certain way, and then you're much more likely to succeed as you launch your offer. Okay. All right, so we've learned that actually companies that have high innovation premiums, they have certain characteristics in their people, their processes, and their philosophies. You've read about their processes a lot. We've read about their people. You can read about philosophies in the Innovators DNA, maybe Friday night reading this summer, if you're really bored. But I would recommend that you do finish reading that. Now, I do want to highlight the importance of creative leadership at the top. So that means you're much more likely, we found, to have an innovative company when the leaders of the company get innovation, when they understand how to do it, when they can coach others. It's hard to coach others how to do something if you don't know how to do it very well, right? And that's why it's important. That's why I want all of you to understand something about how to be an innovator, right? And how to try and see what's next and how to experiment, so that you, at some point in time, as you move into more leadership positions or start companies, that you can then play that role of coaching and helping others. Now, Mark Benioff is the founder CEO of Salesforce.com. They were the most innovative company on the first list we did for the Innovators DNA book. Highest innovation premium. In fact, you may remember last time I had mentioned these were the top 6 companies. Salesforce number 1. Number 2, Amazon, still led by founder Jeff Bezos. At the time we did this first list, 2011, Frank Moll was the founder and still at Intuitive Surgical. They do the Da Vinci system, the robotic-assisted surgery. Tencent Holdings, the Chinese company, that has 730 million users. Sort of the Facebook, they do instant messaging, they have avatars and games and everything, led by their founders. At the time, Apple was still led by Steve Jobs, founder, and number 6 on the list was Google, still led by founders. So one of the things we looked at was noticed that there's kind of a founder effect here, that the founder's still there at a lot of these companies. These companies were successful, the founder sticks around. And then we looked at the top 100. We tried to gather data using our assessment, Innovators DNA assessment, on others, and we found out it didn't have to be the founder. So A.G. Lafley was the CEO of Procter & Gamble when we did this. This was the innovation premium at P&G before Lafley, 23%, and it jumped up to 35% during his term as CEO. Lafley is known, and scores very high on the 5 discovery skills. He behaves a lot like the founder, even though he wasn't the founder. You got to go back like 127 years and be James Gamble to be the founder. And so founders aren't going to stay around forever, right? So the question is, do you have other folks that can help sort of replace them? Yes?
Can I just again just quickly how that premium is calculated?
So the premium is calculated. What we do is, has to be a public corporation, has to have at least 7 years of data, and this data has to come from financials where we can look at the cash flows from existing businesses. There's a way you take the cash flows from existing businesses, you apply the growth rate to that cash flow. This is a fairly complex econometric model. And you apply an S-curve to the cash flows of the existing business, which means these are the cash flows that are likely to happen over, usually you take those out and you have a terminal value. And we take those out and then you bring it back to present value. And that tells you what the market value of the company should be today. This is what investors should be willing to pay for the company. If the market value is higher, meaning the stock price times the shares outstanding, is higher than that, there's an innovation premium. Which means investors are expecting new income streams to come online in the future that aren't sort of there in the existing businesses. And that means new products, new services, new processes that generate income streams, but it has to produce new something to produce new income streams, right? And so that's why we do some other things to make sure that it's focused on just the innovation part of the company, but that's basically how it's calculated. All right, yes? Oh, thank you. Okay, so yeah. So let me just tell you a little bit here then. Leaders of innovative companies, discovery skills on Innovators DNA assessment, 88th percentile. I showed you a version of this earlier. Execution skills, 55th percentile. Distinctive competency is really around discovery, innovation, not execution. It's not that they're not horrible at execution, but it's not their distinctive competency on average. Some of them will actually tell you. Pierre Omidyar, who started eBay, Jeff or David Neeleman, others will say, I'm just not, execution's just not my bag. But I have other people. I hired Jeff Skoll to be my execution guy. That's what Omidyar would say, and Neeleman and others will say the same thing. I understand my strengths and weaknesses, so I try to bring in folks who can be complementary in terms of the skills. Eric?
Just a quick clarification. When you say leaders, you're mostly referring to CEOs?
We're mostly referring to CEOs, or it could be senior top management team, which means this is those people who report directly to CEO. Leaders of non-innovative companies, discovery skills, 67th percentile, execution skills, 80th percentile. So really good at execution. And again, what we tend to do, think about it. You're going to hire somebody. Who do you tend to hire? People who are like you or people who are dislike you? one of the most consistent findings in research is that we tend to hire people that we like. We like ourselves usually. And we think our skills are good, good skills to have. And so what tends to happen is this tends to get replicated throughout the organization. So if it's someone who's execution oriented at the top, they want people who can execute. And feel comfortable often working with those kind of folks, as opposed to feeling comfortable with someone who's very different than you are. All right. Percent of time looking for innovative ideas, 31% versus 15%. If you're going to start a company and come up with an idea and figure out a product, it takes time. It just takes a lot of time. And these are leaders of, these are like senior executives. If you read about the lives of people like Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos, you read that their hands are deep into the innovation process. It's not just something they delegate to R&D. They're involved in it. It matters to them. They signal to the company that it matters. And that's partly the way they get people in their organization that want to be there, is because innovation seems to really matter to the company. And so this is the way that they signal that. And that's going to be true of any team that you lead or any organization that you lead. Just to sort of highlight this with an example, Steve Jobs, during his initial tenure with Apple, helped lead Apple to an average 37% innovation premium from 1980 to 1985. Now, we can look at Jobs and we can look at what he did in those early days, and we know that he helped come up with innovations for Apple. For example, you read the fan story from Innovator's DNA. He's questioning, why does it have to have a fan? It should be quieter. And he keeps pushing it, and that's what leads to creating the first PC that doesn't have a fan. The Xerox PARC story. He visits Xerox PARC, and that's where he really gets the ideas for the mouse and the drop-down menus, the GUI interface. He takes that back, and that's what they build the Macintosh based on that. And you remember the calligraphy story, where he just sits in on the calligraphy classes, no expectation of this creating any value, in a business sense. And then he says, it all comes back to me when we're designing the Mac, that we actually could have this computer produce something other than Courier font. Everything before that, you had one font. It was Courier, and it was ugly. But it was ubiquitous at the time. People didn't even really think about doing other things. And then Jobs, they come out with not only the Mac, but the laser writer printer, and all of a sudden you could do desktop publishing. You could do newsletters and all this other stuff. And it's like, wow, this is cool typography on a computer. So, he leaves. Between 85 and 98, this is what happens to Apple's innovation premium. It becomes an innovation discount. What is an innovation discount? It means you sort of take the income streams that you've got and apply it, but investors are expecting you to shrink. In fact, they're expecting you to shrink faster than even is what is predicted by your cash flows. And so basically, your stock price drops significantly because investors are not expecting you to grow. And in fact, they're expecting you to shrink. So this means we're actually expecting you not only to not grow, you're expecting you to shrink. Yes?
Does this necessarily mean a 30% drop in stock price? Or does it mean just like a rate of change kind of thing? Or?
So it means, it typically means at least a 30% drop in stock price. Because in effect, you've gone from a 37% premium to a 30% discount. So in effect, it would be more like a 67% drop in stock price. But think about Apple in the 1990s. Everybody thought Apple was dead, right? Because, there was, IBM, dominated, PCs dominated. And if you look at what happened during that time period, it's kind of interesting. So there were three CEOs. Scully, who Jobs had brought in from Pepsi, Spindler, he was a marketing guy, and then a guy named Gil Amelio, who actually ended up acquiring Jobs' company and bringing Jobs back in. This was the company's flagship product when Jobs left. I don't know if any of you remember the Performa. Some of you remember that. That was the flagship product. Over the next 13 years, they came out with, about 20 so models from the 250. This was the 200, 250, 274. They came up all the way up to the 640, and then they made the leap to the 5200. Do you want to see the 5200? Are you ready for the innovation? Look at this. Wow, that is really different than that, isn't it? Yeah, you can see the innovation that's been occurring.
How many years
Marshall?
from that first one to the last one?
13 years.
13?
13 years. Yeah, 13 years. Okay. So, Jobs comes back in '98, and all of a sudden you get the iMac, and then you get the iPod, and you get iTunes, and you get iPhone, and you get Apple TV, and you get iPad. And I had someone at the time as we looked at this, and he said, this was, when Star Wars was big back in the early 2000s. He said, you really ought to title this slide, "The Return of the Jobs Eye," because, Jobs came back and he brought really the innovation back to Apple. His leadership really seemed to make a difference. Now, if we look at what happened while he was gone, the innovation premium dropped to a discount. It took from 99 to 2004, 5 years to get it back to just 2%. And then between 2005 and 2010, it jumped to 50%. As we see the emergence of especially iPhone and iPad. Yes.
So he came back and made this huge difference, but do you think he brought, the biggest thing he brought was a vision, or did he bring a technical skill for changing things? Because he came in and I feel like the mentality naturally switched because everyone in their minds oh, we got Steve.
We got Steve Jobs back.
And everyone starts to get excited about it. But I feel like there's only so much that one guy can do to change the whole face of the company.
So let me show you, and I agree, he didn't come up with all of these ideas himself, and that's a really important point here. If you're leading a team or leading a company, you can't do it all yourself. Jobs himself didn't come up with the ideas for all of those products. Right? But when he came back, one of the first things he did was he initiated a new campaign, and it was a marketing campaign. And I want to show you the Emmy Award-winning commercial, which I'm sure most of you have seen from that. And then I want to show you what Jobs said about that commercial and that campaign after it ran. Okay.
Here. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them. Because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Okay, what did Jobs say about this afterwards? He said, when I got back here, Apple had forgotten who we were. He said, remember the whole Think Different campaign we ran? It was certainly for customers to some degree, but it was more for Apple itself. That ad was to remind us of who our heroes are and who we are. And we forgot that for a while, right? He comes back and he's basically saying, are you a crazy one? Right? Are you crazy enough to try and change the world? That's who we want you to be if you're going to be at Apple. Right? And that's a pretty challenging message that he has, but that's what he's trying to create at Apple and trying to create on his team. And it's the kind of thing that you want to create when you're managing leading teams. It's sort of, you know, we want to make a difference. We want to change the world in good ways. And part of your job is to not only inspire people to do it, but help them to develop the skills and know the processes that can be used to do it. So innovative companies have innovative leaders, and example really does matter. So that's an important thing to remember. So just remember that if you want to think differently, you're going to have to act differently. And now you at least have some sense of how you need to act differently as you try to solve problems to come up with the most creative solutions possible. Yes.
So now that Jobs is gone, where do you see Apple going in the innovation premium and things like that?
So I will email you the article that Hal Gersh and I wrote for Forbes. It was published in Forbes with this last year's list of most innovative companies. Apple dropped from number 5 on the list in 2011 to number 79 in 2013. And what we talk about is the problem. Investors don't believe that Apple can do it without Jobs. And they're really questioning that. And it's one of the dangers of having a very visible, public, innovative leader, is if that person leaves, naturally investors are going to ask the question, was it Steve Jobs, or does Apple know how to innovate and have the capabilities without Steve Jobs? And we raise the same question. Could Amazon run into the same problem down the road when Jeff Bezos leaves, or Salesforce.com when Mark Benioff leaves? So when you have a famous leader who's really good at innovation, you have to worry a little bit that investors aren't going to bet on your company because they're bet a lot on the person. Yes?
So when I hear that, I mean, part of successful leadership is leading in the moment, but I feel like a huge part of successful leadership is creating an institution or an organization that will continue after you are gone. And so in that sense, I don't know, was Jobs super successful at that?
In that sense, I think you could argue that Jobs did not succeed. That he didn't succeed in preparing Apple for when he left. And some people, I know people who work for Apple, they say Tim Cook is a great guy, talented leader, reasonably innovative, but he's not Steve Jobs. He doesn't have the same sort of innovation juices as Steve Jobs does, or like someone like a Jonathan Ive. So it's an interesting question as to whether or not these folks are really preparing their organizations for when they leave. Yeah.
In the chapter today, it talked about GM and it compared Durant and Sloan. And I saw kind of a similar pattern with what happened with Jobs, where Durant was kind of more the innovative leader.
Right.
He got kind of run out of his own company when he started Chevrolet, just like Jobs started
like
Jobs. But it said that Sloan is kind of the one that's been remembered more, that's had more of the popularity. So I'm just wondering why that is and what happened with that.
Yeah, so in the early 1930s, we had all of these emerging big companies, which we'd never had before. We'd never had big auto companies, we'd never had railroad companies, we'd never really had shipbuilding companies, and all of a sudden, these organizations are of a size and scale that we've never seen. Sloan was famous because he wrote about what he did at General Motors and how he broke up the work, he broke it up into all these different divisions. That's, at the time, this was viewed as genius, that you had like Chevy and Pontiac. Pontiac was more the exciting cars, and Chevy was low end, and then you had Buick in the middle, and you had Cadillac at the high end. He broke it up so it was manageable and had this specialization of labor and all of that other stuff. And And he became well known because he helped really outline the principles for running a large company. But this means you already have products and you already have business, right? It's during that second part of the S curve. And that's why he became very famous. And Durant, we were surprised. Almost nobody knows about Durant, the guy that founded it. And then, he gets thrown out and he comes back and he buys it again. And then he gets thrown out later, a second time. Yeah.
Was Jobs also successful though as like the leader of large companies? His backing was not huge, and he like successfully managed it. Or was there somebody else?
Apple was not a lot bigger when he came back. It had grown some, but it was not a lot bigger. But no, I don't think he had been successful running a large company, because he'd gone and started Next, and he bought in and acquired Pixar. And that's what he was doing during that time period. And then Next had the operating system that Apple ended up buying. So, so there's this notion, and we've talked about the fact that creativity, it's not just genetic. So there's some things that you now know that you can practice. And many of you are going to be starting families in the next few years. So there's an interesting question about what kind of family culture are you going to create? And whether or not you're likely to try and foster creativity in your children. So when I was learning about the importance of these different skills doing this project, Innovators DNA, I remember when you come home from school, when you were like junior high or high school, what question did your parents ask? How was your day, right? How was school? And what did you say? Good, fine. Did they get anything beyond that? No, you get nothing, right? If you're a parent, you get nothing. So, this would have been probably about 7 or 8 years ago now. So my oldest son, Aaron's 23, and he would, I think, have been a sophomore in high school. He comes home from school, and I've just done an interview with Jeff Bezos. And, there's just these great questioners, and I've decided I'm going to ask a different question today. So he comes home from school, and I say, Aaron, tell me, what was the best question that you heard asked at school today? Or was there a question that you wanted to ask that you didn't ask? Of course, his initial response is, oh, Dad, what are you trying to pull? He doesn't want to get engaged in this game. But I sort of persisted. Okay, let's just sort of go through your schedule. What classes did you have? I quickly learned, there was no question that could ever be asked in biology that he would ever care about. Okay, not interested in science. But he had at the time an engine fundamentals class, and he actually talked a little bit about that. It was interesting to him, and questions about how an engine worked. And I learned something different about my son that day because I asked a different question. And in fact, that has become an area of passion for him. He raced ATVs through high school. He always loved machines. Now he's trying to do startup related to automotive. He wants to do tuning. He wants to tune performance cars. But I asked a different question. So you want to think about how can I ask different questions to my kids, and how can I get my kids to ask different questions? I've tried to be better at putting my kids in new environments. Taking different children to China, to India, to Brazil, to try and get them to new environments and to sort of see how they experience it and what their observations are, and ask them to sort of think about what's different here. I've tried to do some, I would think of them as little experiments. My dad was actually he was a better experimenter on the family than I am. So my dad had a PhD in sociology, was here at BYU, actually moved to the business school, founded the organization behavior department here at BYU. And so he liked to do experiments with his kids to try to understand what we were thinking. So now you understand why I'm a little bit, I remember one time, I'm probably 12 years old, and there is this clean white shirt that is laid down in the middle of the central walkway in our home. Right at the top of the stairs, where we've got to walk at least 8 times a day. My dad has noticed that his 5 kids, his 4 boys and a girl, we don't do anything to help around the house unless we're told. I'm sure that's a big shock. You guys probably did lots of help around the house when you were told. So he leaves it there for 2 days while his kids carefully step across the white shirt. Nobody touches it. Okay? This is an experiment you can do with your kids. How do you get it? So he thinks, okay, they know it's not their shirt. Let's put something bigger there, and something that they know doesn't belong there. So he pulls a dining room chair in and he tips it over and puts it in the walkway. So now we actually have to climb over the dining room chair to get where we're going, and he watches for the rest of the day while we climb over the dining room chair. And then he calls family together. Anybody see the white shirt? Yeah, we saw the white shirt. Did you think to pick it up? It wasn't my white shirt. I didn't put it there. Not my responsibility. Okay, I understand that. Then he says, so where does the dining room chair go? Chorus, dining room. We knew. Anybody see that dining room chair in the hallway? Yeah, that was kind of weird that it was skipped over. So guys, why don't you think to just pick it up and take it back to the dining room? And once again, we did not see it as our responsibility. And so then we have this discussion. So I remember, I'm like 12 years old at the time, a pretty young kid. But this experiment got me to remember something, to think of something that I wouldn't have. And he's like, I want to understand why you don't think that anything in this house is your responsibility. Because if it's not your responsibility, then I'll tell you, none of it's coming your way inheritance-wise when we're done with it. You're not going to help us take care of it. And I'll say, yeah, maybe we are interested. Maybe we'll help take care of this stuff. So an interesting experiment to try and get people to think a little bit differently. And even now it's my home, and I'll see something out, and whether it's a folding chair from a Sunday, dinner or something, and I'll think of that stupid dining room chair, and like, whose responsibility is to put that folding chair away? Now it's my home, so I should feel more responsibility, but I do feel that sense of responsibility. I remember another time, this is 1970s, well before wife swap. My dad tries kid swap. Kid swap is really good when you got a 16-year-old that's not happy with maybe what's going on at home. So he swaps my older brother Mike for the neighbor kid Herb McLean for a week. Okay, Mike's got to go live by the McLean's rules, for a week, and Herb comes and lives with us. After a week, he pulls the families together. And he has the kids in particular, these are both like 16, 17-year-old boys, talk about what was different in the two families. And what did they like, what did they not like? And it was really interesting to hear these kids talk, because I remember, I have since realized that my dad strategically picked the McLeans because they were much stricter than the Dyers. So that he would realize things weren't so bad at the Dyers. But I remember Mike comes back, and they had played a game, a certain card game, as I recall, at, I think it was family night. And he comes back and he says, hey, they played this game, and it was really fun. Could we play it in our family? And so here you now have a 17-year-old kid coming back and championing a family activity, for one thing, which 17-year-olds often don't want to do. But also, he's coming back with a different perspective on what it's like to live in a different family. You might think, it's kind of hard for me to maybe question, observe, network, experiment. If it is, that's okay. Let's just at least try to save the next generation. Right? So at least try and practice with your kids. See if you can help them to become better questioners and observers and networkers and experimenters. Because family culture is important in terms of helping people learn that it's okay to explore, and it's okay to observe and question and try new things. All right. So you've come a long way in 4 months. You've learned a lot about strategy. And you really do. I mean, just looking at what you were able to do with Sears and Redbox, after 8 to 10 weeks of prep. I mean, I would have loved to have had someone from Sears or from Redbox be able to come and watch your presentations. You've come a long way in terms of understanding strategy. But I thought it would be helpful for us to maybe walk through, and you're going to be, getting to a final exam here, walk through some of the key ideas that I've tried to impress upon you in this course. And so this might help you to remember some of the key ideas. Very first time I did this, my very first year at Wharton, I tried to do a sort of class summary, and it was a snoozer for me and the students, I think. So I've decided that actually one way that students tend to remember things better is if they have a visual. And sometimes the cartoons can help be the visual. So we started with the question, what is strategy? You ask, what is a company strategy? When you started this class, you didn't really know how to answer that question. And now you do. Now you have a framework for describing a company's strategy. So here, Dilbert's meeting with his boss, and the boss says, make your report consistent with our strategic plan. Dilbert says, what's our strategic plan? And the boss says, it's a secret. He says, how can I do my report if I don't know the strategy? And he says, okay, I'll let you glance at it. So he pulls it from his desk, and he says, time's up. That's long enough. Dilbert says, that's the warranty for your chair. He says, really? Well, I've been managing to this for years. Well, clearly, this is not strategy, right? You know something about what strategy is and what strategy is not, right? It's about identifying markets that you're going to, focus on. You're going to try and figure out unique value for those markets, how to deliver that unique value, and then how to appropriate it. So successful strategies, you're trying to avoid perfect competition. It's not easy to stand out if you're a penguin, but that's what you're trying to do if it's strategy. You've got to offer something unique, some way to stand out from the crowd. We also talked about two major sources of superior profitability for firms: attractive industry, and then your unique value, the resources and capabilities, your position in that industry. Let's talk just about a couple of the key ideas from attractive industry. We talked about the 5 forces model, which you understand. One of those forces is barriers to entry. Here you can see an example of a barrier to entry. Clearly, she doesn't have everything going on right there, but it is the best barrier to entry I could find out there, and clearly it is a barrier to entry. So that's one way that you keep an industry attractive, is you create barriers to entry. We talked about different ways to do that. We also talked about buyer and supplier power. Here we have Dilbert and his buddy bring in a vendor. They have supplier power for once. And he says, although we are nothing but pond scum in this company, it's nice to know we can still find someone of lower status to torment. That's the vendor, the supplier. You call these brochures, how can I even consider buying products from a vendor such as you? And he's flicking him and he says, tell me if this hurts. You must do our bidding, vendor. We control your economic future. Of course, our buying decision will be based solely on quantifiable performance measurements. Your competitor completed the vendor challenge course in 37 seconds. Yeah, and he gave us very nice t-shirts. So, buyer, supplier power, those are things that lead to higher profits at the industry level. And we also talked about bringing unique value and having unique resources and capabilities to do that. First, the good news, sir. I count only one Indian. Of course, that is one heck of a big Indian who is likely to be a pretty valuable resource in a battle. So that's what you're looking for when you're trying to deliver unique value, is you want those kinds of resources. We talk about first mover advantage. Hey, they're lighting their arrows. Can they do that? Now, I like this as an example of first mover advantage, because if you do something that's unexpected the first time, and you burn down the wagon train, kill them. What's the second mover response? Right? There is none. First movers often change, they do something that changes the playing field forever for the second mover. Very much like, you know, that Walmart store, when it goes into the small town, that market now has changed forever because now it has a discount store. If you do find that there's a better way to do things, you should try and learn how to do it. I think of this as the first case of prehistoric benchmarking. And clearly, we know Zog's the smartest because he's wearing glasses. He's already invented that, and now he's, you know, he's pulled his hand out of the fire and roasting his meat. But the second movers here actually won't be better off if they imitate Zog. At least they won't be better off than Zog. They'll just be at an equal place, right? So if your strategy is all about imitation, it means you will only always reach parity. You won't create competitive advantage. Right? So that's why it's important to be figuring out what to do next, or trying to do something that's valuable that others don't know or understand. And then once you've done something that's valuable, you want to try and protect it and hide it, even if you can. Much like these folks here. Anthropologists. They're running to hide the goodies because they don't want, you know, the anthropologists to know what's really going on. And I still remember, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but I remember doing interviews early 2000 time period. Amazon still hadn't turned a profit. I was interviewing the chief financial officer. And they had someone from PR. Amazon always likes to have someone from PR on the phone whenever you're doing an interview. It's like a signal, don't tell them anything you shouldn't, right? Really, because they're trying to protect some of what they do, because they don't want others to know how they do it a lot of times. And so that is an important part around keeping key employees, keeping people happy, because, you know, those folks walk out the door, a lot of times your key knowledge walks out the door. And so that's one of the really important, I think, lessons too around building a team is that you're trying to also create incentives and reasons for people. They want to stay. They want to stay over the long run because of that. We also talked about alliances and cooperative strategy. I showed this to you. This is one of the medieval pickup battles. This is dumb, really dumb. Why do we have to go skins? But more and more today, when you compete, you're part of an alliance group, an ecosystem. You often have to pick partners to team up with, and you have to connect what you do in terms of resources and capabilities and the value offers with others, and that collectively that can be a way to succeed. And so that, I think that's very important. Here we have Dilbert, and he says, the status of our strategic alliance is doomed. Our ponderous and inefficient management style caused their best people to quit and create a competing company. To which the boss says, we must find a way to destroy that new company. Dilbert thinks for a moment and he says, I'll see if they're interested in a strategic alliance. So their capabilities are not creating value through alliances, it's destroying other companies through their alliances. We talked about different growth strategies along the way. Here the boss says, our CEO says we are poised for huge growth in earnings. In an unrelated move, he announced that he will leave the company before any of his stock options vest. The poor guy will miss all of our growth. If you think it's coming, wait. It's not. All right, we talked about international strategy. Some of the globalization drivers you may have seen is one of the early experiments in transportation. So we've seen the world shrink with improvements in transportation, with improvements in communication technologies. Here we see the modern lion as they use technologies to get things done. So the world has really shrunk, so you really have to more and more think of the world as your market in a way that you didn't historically. There are different ways to attack that. One way is global strategy, rigid standardization. Gentleman says, well, I'm not sure. You don't carry any other styles? But you may remember the global strategy was we're going to have a standardized product that we sell around the globe. We're not going to modify it. That was really what Matsushita Panasonic had done for years. Others have more of the multi-domestic strategy where they're actually tailoring to each market. And that was more like Philips, and then Samsung, some like Samsung are using more of a transnational, more of a hybrid approach between the two. And in this last section of the course, we've really moved more to talk about innovative strategies. This is really, I think, a disruptive technology for knowledge transfer. If only we could do that. A lot of times it'd be great to grab somebody else's head and just see if you could know what's going on inside there and what they've learned. And we talked about really the behaviors, the keys to generating creative ideas. So, it's important. Don't be afraid to ask questions to get people to think differently. This is posing questions that challenge the status quo or impose or eliminate constraints. The boss at Dilbert's company decides he would try this. And many of you have heard this phrase, there are no dumb questions. Well, does anybody have any questions about our plan? Ask me anything. There are no stupid questions. If you cross the international date line on your birthday, would you still get presents? Oh, great, there are stupid questions. And I don't know the answer. So you do have to be aware that you actually might get some interesting and perhaps stupid questions if you ask for them. You want to make sure that you are trying to observe, in particular, what jobs people are trying to get done inside your company, outside your company. I like using this phrase, what's the job we're trying to get done? Let's make sure that we're honed in on the job that we're trying to do. Remember, simple observation is not enough. You've got to attentively observe and engage in associational thinking for observation to make a difference. There's an opportunity here in this cartoon, if you look closely, at least if you're a headhunter. There's a couple of big ones here. And this highlights the importance of having your boat in the water, right? If you're not out, if you're not observing, you aren't going to see the opportunities when they float by. So it is important to sort of keep your boat out on the water. Remember, network ideas, opportunities, and resources come through people. Try and find, especially people with different backgrounds and opportunities. I'd really like to encourage you in this class, if you haven't, over the next year, in the next couple of classes, to find opportunities to go grab lunch, just go visit with different members of the class, just to get to know them. And I think you'll find one of the most valuable things that you'll take away from this program are your relationships with each other and the knowledge that you get from each other. That's going to be really valuable to you throughout your lives and throughout your careers. For example, the one polar bear learns from the other one about a chewy treat. Oh, hey, I just love these things. Crunchy on the outside and a chewy center. And, never would have found out about it if he hadn't been told by his buddy. And then finally, we want to explore and experiment, try on new experiments. Here we have, and notice, gentlemen, the faster I go, the more Simmons sounds like a motorboat. I'm not sure that's a really valuable experiment, but it's at least trying something new, something that's a little bit different. Most of you probably didn't know that this was the way fire was invented. It actually happened in a lab. Again, someone just trying something new and unexpected. And the other thing, it's really important that we're finding with entrepreneurs in particular, but anytime you're trying to do something new, you got to be persistent. Success may rely on multiple iterations on an idea. This requires endurance, so you have to be careful not to give up too soon. Okay, and this is a very fine balance because sometimes you do it. You really do. It's time to move on, man. It's like give up. It's not going to happen. So, some of you are out there like, wait, that's me. Sometimes it's over. You do have to let it go. So there is this fine balance, but you want to be persistent, and you also though want to take risks. So then I says to Borg, as long as we're under siege, why don't we start a movie set? So, Borg ends up with some arrows in his foot. This is risk-taking, but it is not of the calculated sort. I want you to take calculated risks. It's not clear that much good could happen as a result of getting missed. All right. So I may have shown you this before, but I like this risk-taking much better. The spiders on the slide. If we pull this off, we'll be right? This is risky. It's an innovation, but at least there's a payoff, right? So you want to make sure you're taking calculated risks, all right? So we're encouraging this notion of risk-taking, but one of the things I've highlighted is risk-taking. Smart risk-taking is when you do experiments and you learn through those experiments. So it's basically we've learned, and you haven't invested a ton of money in something before you figure out whether or not it's likely to work. That's smart risk-taking. And you hope that there's like a big reward if you're successful. I also want to highlight one other thing. This cartoon is pull out, Ben, pull out. Hit it harder. So it's interesting. We try and develop these models, and in this class, one of the issues you raised is, and that I'll try to do a better job of next year, is trying to help people understand how to analyze a case. And part of it, for some of the cases we do, is this is a company that's been successful. What's the model that predicts why they've been successful? Lay that out, right? What drives? What is driving it? Because if you have a whole bunch of models of what's worked and what hasn't worked, that can help you in the future as you face a new situation to maybe draw on that. But let's face it, you look at individuals that are really successful. Historically, before 1980, you looked at somebody who was wealthy, and it was 95% of the people were wealthy because they owned land or oil. It was basically, it was luck to a large extent because they were right place, right time, right? Sometimes you drill and you strike oil or blood, and sometimes you don't. And so sometimes it's easy. You use all of these tools that you've learned in school, whether you start a company or whether you're doing it in your career and it doesn't seem to work. Well, there's a lot of randomness. I just want to make sure you realize, don't put it all on you. There's a lot of things that influence why things work out or why things don't in a business situation. You may have done everything right, but sometimes you strike oil and sometimes you don't. It's just, there are these sort of stochastic, events, things that go on in the environment. You can't really prepare for everything. So beware of that. So final food for thought. Get a fast start. Be a first mover by investing heavily up front. Your reputation at your first job will be made quickly. And so it's really important to try, to be first. All right, what's the name of the third person that walked on the moon? Who knows? What was it? Buzz third or second? He was second. He was second. Third. Buzz Lightyear. Buzz Lightyear. Nobody knows who was third. Is there anybody in here who doesn't know who was first? Right? Everybody knows the large one, right? So there is something about you start fast, you invest heavily the first 6 months, develop a reputation as someone who's good, then you can go and you can start then set a marathon working pace. You can't sprint forever, but I recommend sprinting the first 3 to 6 months of any new job. I remember when I started at Bain, I showed up 2 months early, and I went in and I did all their training materials the month before as much as I could on my own, because I wanted to make sure I was prepared to succeed. And I think that really helped. But then you gotta set a marathon work pace. You don't want work to incrementally take over your life. And then remember, network, network, network. One of the challenges we often have in our culture is we want to get home, we bring our brown bag lunch, we work, we stay at our desks, we eat our lunch, we go home, and we don't really get to know the people we work with. And we have to do that, especially with folks who are not of our same faith. That's important. And find work you enjoy and feel is really worthwhile. You will find you'll be so much happier if you find something you have a passion about. Like this fellow here. he's in hell, and one of the devils says, you know, we're just not reaching that. He's whistling, enjoying his work. And, you know, that's the person you want to be. You want to be the person who's just enjoying what you're doing. You know, you'd love doing it even if you were, you know, in the proverbial hell, as it were, because you love it. And I know when I left Bain, my friends, I was one of the very few people who left Bain as a manager to go back for a PhD. And people said, Jeff, you obviously don't understand the concept of opportunity cost. You know, and you know, around money, I didn't. It was a big opportunity cost. But for me, the chance to choose what I was going to work on in terms of research and consulting, and to have the opportunity to teach something that I knew I would enjoy, I'm a far better, I think, professor and researcher than I was consultant. And it's because I enjoy it a lot more. That was good, but this is definitely better. So try and find something that you'll love doing. And it doesn't have to be the most, you know, we know a lot of people focus on maybe consulting or, you know, being a really successful as an entrepreneur. If you love it, great. But if you don't do something you don't love. And finally, you want to remember, if you have a pretty poster and it keeps saying, or all it takes to motivate you, you probably have a very easy job, the kind robots will be doing soon. So you don't want that kind of a job, folks. You know, go find something that really requires some challenge and that you think you will love. And I do want you to make sure you go beyond execution to add value. I'll send this last one along. But I want you to try and be good managers. As this gentleman says, you know what I think, folks, improving technology isn't important. Increased profits aren't important. What's important is to be warm and decent human beings. And of course, they're all looking at him like he's crazy. Right? But I can tell you that the managers, the people I worked with, that I was willing to try and, you know, partners that I was wanting to sort of walk through walls to help were the ones that I thought really cared about me as a person and were trying to help me be successful in my career. If you can be that kind of manager, you'll get the kind of support and motivation from the folks that work with you. So it's been great being with you in this class, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night and next year. Have a great summer.